Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, John A. Blues, and with this video, I'll be discussing my thoughts on episode 10 of the anime series Shouwa Genroku Rakugo Shinjuu. And very much are we seeing 5 years has passed since the events of the previous episode, wherein we saw our main trio well and truly splitting ties. Miyokichi and Tsukuroku have effectively gone off to live lives of their own, and life has moved on for Kikuhiko. But of course, we see the Yakumo of the day is very ill, and he is soon to be on his deathbed, and he even passes away by the end of this episode. And it's such a moving and emotional, playing out of this particular plot, because it's also very revelatory. And we see that for a man who himself refers to himself on his deathbed as being without many regrets, he is moved to tears in what he has had to do with Tsukuroku in this modern, flashback sense, and in wanting to further the sort of progress of Rakugo and further the progress of this name, which is something that hails back to a past that is cut very much from the same cloth as Kikuhiko. What Kikuhiko has gone through with his Tsukuroku, the Yakumo of the day went very much through the same exact scenario with the Tsukuroku of that foregone era. And you might arguably say, it's a little bit too on the nose that all of these things are so interweaved and interconnected between all of these characters, but I find it to be utmost captivating that. Because here is a Yakumo who he looks at Kikuhiko as being the spitting image of himself, yet he cares so much for both of these boys he took in. These apprentices are his sons. And he regrets what he's had to do, what he was moved to do with Tsukuroku, who he can see the talent within. But Tsukuroku has always broken conventions, and this hails back to the very same, his namesake formerly, the Tsukuroku who taught him everything he knew. And the idea of taking on that point of view of, to secure the longevity of Rakugo in this, fictional setting, the idea of evolution and breaking beyond convention and all these kinds of things, wherein it's such a salacious and captivating idea on the one hand to try to introduce all these new elements to this tried and true artistic format that is Rakugo. But it's all of these things that are completely, they are, you don't do this. These are rules you do not break, you do not impede upon. You do not think yourself bigger and better and more comprehending than the art form itself and the elders within it who came before you. And so Tsukuroku being banished is a sour point we see on the Yakumo's deathbed because of how closely resembling his own backdrop, his own history, the dynamic between he, Kikuhiko, and Tsukuroku has been. And I just find that absolutely penultimately compelling, because there is even a deathbed reluctance to want to give up the Yakumo name with everything, all the blood, sweat, and tears that has surrounded this name, as the Yakumo points out. He is even reluctant to want to give it up to Kikuhiko, who he feels is the best embodiment. Everyone feels is the best embodiment, having now eschewed Tsukuroku, of taking on that mantle. And even in the Yakumo's death, I was actually quite shocked to see that this was not something immediately passed on to Kikuhiko. Like, even beyond his death, he still is reluctant to take on that name, because he's still held up by certain reservations and all that kind of stuff, and they're just like, take the name. You're the guy. Take the name. He's had, this guy come up to him, and when he and the Yakumo were, coming to this particular performance, which would be the Yakumo's last, he's approached by someone trying to seek apprenticeship with him. And this is something, again, the idea of breaking the conventions and the rules and all of those, sort of encapsulating ideas of what, the form and function of the Rakugo is, and how you do not step on toes. You do not, sort of eschew the elders for the younger generation. This guy's completely missed the mark, gone straight to Kikuhiko, and right there is his master, the Yakumo. And so this is like the greatest insult. And it's all about, in a sense, an honor code, an honor system of respect. Sugoroku did the most outlandish, wrongful thing in that he lacked, from the word go, the respect for the confinement, the conformity of the art form as seen and beholden to, the command of all of these generations, past, that were still in and of this moment. And that, to me, again, like, I'll keep using the word captivating time and time again, because it just solidifies the distinction between not only the performance styles of Kikuhiko and Sugoroku respectively, but just the way of being, the way they hold to themselves, who they are as people. And it's quite interesting to me, with that in mind, for the first performance to be conducted by Kikuhiko after the Yakumo has passed on. It's almost as though he wasn't sure what he was going to do. He went out on stage and he wasn't sure what he was going to do. He pulled it out of his shirt sleeve. This very disconcerting, he's saying, I could do a sentimental piece, but that's not my Rakugo. What am I going to do? And he pulls out this very unnerving, borderline horrific, like very scary and tense particular performance of this, what I can only assume is like the equivalent of, the boat driver on the river Styx, or like a Grim Reaper kind of character, very much toying with the soul of someone who was burdened by regrets in his life, being somewhat of a parallel. This is an episode of parallels, even down to having each their own respective Sugorokus, generationally speaking. But they were both rivals, in the past, much as there was a sort of unspoken rivalry in this modern sense with Kikuhiko and Sugoroku, where they were brothers, but at the same time, there was still that distinction between them, that, father always loved you best kind of aesthetic, as we saw coming to a head with the final confrontation between Sugoroku and Kikuhiko in the last episode, to the point of life and death, and finding your truest self and embracing it. In the case of Kikuhiko, who has now done that with this performance, he falls out almost as if from under the weight of things, feeling utmost free in penultimate solitude, having broken all interpersonal ties, having no one left to have to be beholden to the, expectations of. It is sheerly now he and the audience. And in this performance, again, this ghostly performance where it's very much about a man being toyed with and having to confront the fear of the end of his own life, his mortality, as well as dealing with the regrets he may have still had held over by the time his life is at its end. All of these things are just such, well placed and well pitched to rebound off of each other and solidify each individual aspect as one conglomeration concept. This is really, truly, like we've seen this beat played before, where Kikuhiko has found himself. But this is the turning point that brings Kikuhiko bound to where we see him as the modern Yakumo at the start of the series, mentally, internally. But what I really love is once you see him settled into that, and so utmost penultimately satisfied that that is what he is, that is what he's become, and this is where he's left, he's still very much, and I think arguably moved by what few regrets the Yakumo had before his passing, and voiced on his deathbed to Kikuhiko, is he motivated to get back in touch with the head woman of the geisha house and try to track down Miyokichi and Sukeroku? To try to, just see for himself that he can move on without any further regrets, that they are okay. And he is met with the absolutely most tremendous form of going against everything that, speaks to his existence and who he is, the internal equilibrium he has now reached, the absurdity, the sort of uncategorical anarchy of tracking down where they presumably are living, walking into this little sort of restaurant, and here is the young child Konatsu performing. And the instant turn of, like, from being quizzical and inquisitive, the look on Kikuhiko's face, to suddenly, like, it's almost like somebody slapped him right across said face. He doesn't, like, he stops. Everything stops. Like, this is the most incredible thing he has ever seen in a negative sense. Like, he's not bewildered and finding this wondrous. He's not impressed by this at all. He is, borderline, I would say, restraining himself from being like, I'm going to choke a bitch, for lack of a better term. And I love how little Konatsu, just adorable in the way she is very much working the room. Very much, is she emboldened? Very much is she commanding the audience's attention. She knows she is a kawaii little child. She knows she can utilize that to full benefits. But it's also, she is, smart beyond her years. Because look who her parents are. They have prospered to a point. They have made the best for themselves to a point. And I just think it's adorable. She's going around, if you heard the performance, any part of it, you're paying. And by the way, have something to drink, have something to eat. Because you're here. You're taking up space. Do good by us. And that clash, that final clash between Kikuhiko and Konatsu, just, oh man, it just made me grin and made me laugh, because that's what I love about this series. The character dynamics on display. There's always a level of, the envelope being pushed. The people pushing each other's buttons. And the evolution of these characters being very realistic. And I have to give a shout out of thanks to YouTube user and viewer and commenter Ihoba, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who has been a guidepost for me every step of the way, being very informative as far as letting me know that the state of Rakugo in Japan is actually quite different from what it is in this series, where it's this dying art form that, the Yakumo of the day in the modern sense, with the adult, Konatsu and everything like that, is the only Rakugo performer left kind of thing. It's actually quite a different scenario in Japan, where there are 4, huge sort of Rakugo playhouses in this day, in the modern era. And like all of that stuff is fascinating to me, because I really don't have a large familiarity with it. And that's very much, it speaks to my love of sharing my fascination with this particular series, being very much, captivated by the characters and the story as it unfolds, and what is going on with their lives, and how realistic it all is, and yet to find and gain that knowledge that there is still a level of, this is utmost fiction, but it plays off of the concerns that were in the awareness of certain Rakugo performances in that era. And even maybe today, I mean, with any art form, especially performance arts and things of that sort, when you have the digital mediums of the greater internet, the World Wide Web, and television, and something as simple as going to the movies, is this a dying art form? The idea of releasing films into theaters and people going and spending their hard-earned money in a world of all these digital mediums and downloads and Netflix and this kind of stuff. The same has been said about performance on a stage when movies came along. And there's always that worry, the printed word, physical novels and books and publications in the wake of being able to just go online and look at, a newspaper's website. This is something that is definitively a part of every kind of art, even painting and that kind of thing. When photography came along, it was like, well, are painted works still going to have resonance and still be an interest and an intrigue and all these kinds of things? Can they captivate yet? Can they still speak to the soul? Can they communicate? And a lot of those things are encapsulated by this series, and speaks very much as a writer myself to just, that concern about, will I ever see my own creations in print? Will they be relegated to digital? Will they even see the light of day? Because by the time I complete a project, will, written word still be a thing? And so yeah, this is just another chapter of why I find this series so captivating, the characterization and the story in the utmost, but also that outlying idea of what art is and how important and passionate it can be to us. And so yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of episode 10 of Shouwa Genroku Rakugo Shinjuu, if you've seen it, if you were as moved by it as I was, if you were as somewhat taken aback by now, in fact, Kikuhiko having reached this level of full-on solitude and satisfaction for it. And did it give you a smile when he ran headlong into Konatsu and just had his whole world shattered before him? Presumably the calm before the storm, when they all come back together again, Sugoroku, Miyokichi, and Kikuhiko himself. So, yeah, otherwise that'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.